Hello listeners, this is your host Roxanne, and today we're going to be heading down another dark crossroad. Have you ever had one of those nightmares or have a fear of being buried alive? If so, then this episode is not for you. Today we'll be covering the Chowchilla Bus Kidnapping. This case was covered by the podcast Morbid. Shout out to Morbid, Elena and Ash, and they did a really good job at covering this case. I got really into it, and while listening to the episode, it gave me full body chills. So I knew that I had to research it and do it for the podcast. So with that said, let's jump right in. On July 15, 1976, a busload of children aged 5 to 14 and their school bus driver, Ed Ray, who was 55 at the time, were abducted on a country road in Madera County in California around 4 p.m. on their way back from a swimming outing at the fairgrounds. Them and their bus driver were driven about 100 miles to a remote quarry near Livermore, California. The bus that they had been in, that was the school bus, was later found empty, covered with bamboo and brush, and in a drainage ditch 9 miles west of town. The victims, 19 girls and 7 boys, along with Ray, the school bus driver, were driven around for 11 hours in 2 different vans, and with only some construction lights illuminating the dark quarry where they arrived, the kidnappers ordered their 27 victims into what was a moving van, which looked like a massive grave buried in the Livermore rock quarry. This van, the kidnappers had, beforehand, planned this whole thing out and dug a hole in the quarry and put this van there and planned on kidnapping this whole bus of children. I don't know if they originally just planned on kidnapping one or a few, or if it was all of them, but later on we will learn why I think they decided to kidnap the entire school bus of children. One by one, the children climbed down a ladder and into the van. They were actually instructed to come out of the bus that they were originally in, one at a time, and the kidnappers would go in with a gun and order them to come out. They would shut the door and leave the rest in there, and nobody knew what was happening to the children that were being taken out one by one. To be honest, if it was me, and I'm thinking this is what was in their head, they thought these people were taking one kid out at a time and murdering them. And it was like when you were chosen to go, it was like walking to your death. So one by one, these children were led down the ladder and into this van that is buried in the dirt in this quarry. It was covered under several feet of dirt. After the last student ends up going into this bus, the kidnappers removed the ladder that they had gone down into the bus with, and they end up putting a metal disc, the drainage whatever things, over the bus where they end up crawling down in, and they are entombed into this bus underground. And then the kidnappers start shoveling dirt onto this bus. And they end up being buried underground. All these little kids and this poor school bus driver buried all together. After 16 hours underground in an 8-foot by 16-foot space, the children waited and waited for rescue or for death to come. The younger ones were crying helplessly, with the older ones trying to comfort them. There was a stench throughout the entire bus of vomit and filth from being trapped underground in the bus with so many children. It filled the air and intensified with time with the California heat. One of the survivors, Linda, remembers every detail of this horror. And in the many years since, she has tried to avoid a normal full night of sleep. I can imagine that this is so because I imagine when she closes her eyes, she is back in that space. It was stated that while they were down there with the heat and having to pee or poop in a certain area and the smell and the children crying, they were also losing air, and rapidly. It would be different if it was just 1 or 2 people down there. It would have lasted longer. There were 19 little girls, 7 boys, and an adult man underground in a little tiny bus with no air. And whatever air was down there was getting rid of very quickly. So along with this thought of wondering if they're going to be saved or if they're going to die, they are all running out of air and they're feeling it. Okay, so back to Linda and her being afraid to go to sleep. She ends up stating, I would not allow myself to go into a deeper sleep because I didn't want to have the dream. So much of my life, people wonder how I ever sleep, or if I ever sleep. Well, I've always tried not to go into the deeper REM sleep. Sure, there are times that I have, and I've always tried to wake myself whenever I start getting a bad dream. The real-life nightmare ended thanks to the ingenuity of the bus driver, Edward Ray, and some of the students who planned a daring escape while the kidnappers were outside. The hostages had stacked mattresses that were in the moving truck high enough to help them reach the metal plate on the roof. But the plate was covered with a massive truck battery, and then on top of that was piles and piles of dirt. Ray and several of the older boys, they struggled and struggled to open this top. And if you can imagine, not only is this metal plate probably extremely heavy and hard to move and maneuver, it has batteries on it, heavy, and the pressure of dirt pushing on all of this. So this calls for a lot of strength and determination. Linda recalled Edward's digging up and out, Mike was digging, Jeff was digging, Robert's digging, everybody was digging. Eventually, they ends up clearing enough space to escape. The children, some climbing on top of each other's shoulders, fled while the kidnappers were taking a nap. Yes, taking a nap. So they end up kidnapping an entire bus of children. Not only just children, babies. These are small children. And a man who was just doing his job, and his job is to protect these children, bury them underground in a bus. And then they go and take a nap. They lay their head down on a pillow after doing this and take a nap because it was so exhausting, right? Kidnapping all these freaking kids. Anyway. The victims, they ended up digging their way out and were found in a remote area near the Shadow Cliffs East Bay Regional Park. They were then taken to the nearby Santa Rita Rehabilitation Center, where they were pronounced in good condition. The children and their bus driver returned safely to Chowchilla by a police-escorted bus shortly before dawn on July 17, 1976. Investigators dug up the van and learned it had been buried in a quarry in November 1975. The 100-acre Portola Valley estate of the quarry owner, Frederick Woods, was searched. Woods' son, Fred Newhall Woods, 24, was missing by happenstance. Authorities issued an all points bulletin, or an EPB, for young Woods and his two friends, James Schoenfeld, who was also 24 years old, and his younger brother, Richard Schoenfeld, who was 22. They were sons of a wealthy podiatrist. Officials said they discovered a rough draft of a $5 million ransom note on the Woods estate. For the rest of her childhood, Linda took a bit of solace thinking that the three kidnappers, brothers Richard and James and Fred Woods, would likely spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Hey dudes, let's talk about Podbean. What is Podbean, you ask? Podbean is a podcast hosting and monetizing platform. If you're looking to start a podcast, does your friend have a podcast? Do your parents? Okay, never mind. Anyway, Podbean is an easy and powerful way to create, promote, and monetize your podcast. Everything you need for a successful podcast. More than 600,000 podcasters trust in Podbean podcast hosting services. They provide all the services that you need to start your podcast and achieve your goals. You want to start a podcast about momming. You want to start a podcast about cooking. You want to start a podcast about fishing. You want to start a true crime You want to start a true crime podcast? Podbean's got you. Make compelling podcasts right from your phone with the podcast recording app, or capture any moment with professional quality Podbean live streaming. Publish your audio and video in one ultra-simple, secure platform to grow your audience quickly and easily. Sign up and get 1 month free with the promo code. Type in www.podbean.com/darkcrossroads and get 1 month free of Podbean streaming audio recording. On July 23rd, so this is 6 days after the children escaped and were all reunited with their families, Richard Schoenfeld, accompanied by his attorney and his father, surrendered voluntarily in Oakland and were held in lieu of $1 million bail. On July 29th, Woods was captured in Vancouver, British Columbia, and James Schoenfeld was arrested in Menlo Park while reportedly preparing to surrender. On November 5th, a Madero County judge ordered the trial be moved from Madera County, and on November 10th, it was assigned to Alameda County. In 1977, on July 25th, Woods and the Schoenfelds pled guilty to 27 counts of kidnapping for ransom, and the prosecution dropped 18 counts of robbery. Then, on December 15, 1977, a Superior Court judge found the trio guilty of 3 counts of kidnapping with bodily harm, which usually carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility for parole. In the end, each of the men were given 27 sentences of 7 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But don't get your hopes up there. Because in 1980, an appeals panel overturned the original sentences, saying the men had caused no serious bodily injury and therefore should have the chance for parole. Now here I'm like, okay, maybe they didn't cause serious bodily injury, but These children were down there almost suffocating, had no means of a bathroom, underground. And if you think about it, the mental injury and emotional injury, not only did they cause them, but for the rest of their lives, I think is serious enough. So after kidnapping and pleading guilty to kidnapping dozens of children and trapping them underground, Richard Schoenfeld was paroled from prison in June of 2012, and his brother, James Schoenfeld, was released in August of 2015. And currently, Frederick Woods, who was inmate number B90399 at the California Men's Colony Prison in St. Louis Obispo, California, was granted parole in August of 2022. When Linda learned of Woods being able to walk free, she said, "I was in a state of shock. I was not expecting that." She said that she has attended every parole hearing since Richard Schoenfeld was released, including hearings for James Schoenfeld and Fred Woods. At Fred's most recent hearing, the 70-year-old said he was deeply remorseful for the terror and trauma he inflicted as a 24-year-old. Linda states that those words don't absolve him from the horror that victims still grapple with decades later. She stated, "It didn't change the act. It didn't change the outcome. It didn't change the years before. It didn't change all the memories of what happened. The memories will never go away." Frederick Woods has been behind bars since he was 24. Now in his 70s, he's missed most of his life opportunities and lost both of his parents while he was imprisoned. No one denies his crime was heinous, but he's not a monster. All of this was stated by Woods' attorney, Dominique Bonos. She also states, "He is not the same person. He doesn't think the same way that he did when he was 24 years old." Over the past several decades, Woods has reflected on his crime, worked as a prisoner in pest control, and taken classes including courses on empathy and victim impact. He's always felt remorse for what he did, Bonos states. Now, there are a few reasons that are possible that Fred has stayed in prison years longer than his accomplices. He was perceived to be the ringleader of the entire kidnapping scheme, and he also had some nonviolent infractions while being in prison, such as having unauthorized cell phones. Fred's attorney states that Woods is no longer a threat to society, and the kidnapping victims need not fear for their safety. She also states that Rick Schoenfeld was the first to be released in 2012, and he's led a very quiet life. He hasn't committed any harm to anyone. And James Schoenfeld was released in 2015, and it's the same thing. As for her own client, she states there's really not much more you can do to show he's a changed person. He spent 46 years in prison, and he's not hurt a fly. It doesn't make any sense for him to be in there any longer. Now, on the other side, Linda disagrees. She's been serving a life sentence of traumatic memories since she was 10 years old and believes kidnappers should complete an entire life sentence. She states, if your child was kidnapped and buried alive, how long is long enough? How long is long enough for 26 children on a school bus to be kidnapped and buried alive? Today, the bus kidnapping event is still remembered with strong emotions. It doesn't take much to trigger panic attacks for Linda, who was a fourth grader at Dairyland Elementary School at the time of the kidnapping. The sight of a white moving van, construction lights, a small room that reminds her of being trapped. There is now a granite monument dedicated to the victims, which is located adjacent to the Chowchilla Police Department, to mark where the victims were reunited with their families. On February 26, 2015, Edward Ray's birthday, this was the bus driver, The city of Chowchilla officially renamed and dedicated the city's largest park and home to many youth activities, and Edward Ed Ray as a lasting tribute to this local hero. Okay, dudes, so I don't know about you, but I am, at this moment, extremely thankful and glad that I did not have to ride a school bus often when I was in school. And I for sure am going to do my darnest to not let my child ride a school bus after reading this. Every story teaches me a new lesson, and it teaches me, things that I should and should not change in my life, and it also makes me extremely grateful and thankful for my life and for my upbringing and the lessons I have learned and the lessons I am learning. But thank you for listening, and if you want to hang out some more, check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Pinterest. And also check out the website at www.darkcrossroadspodcast.com. Don't forget to like, rate, and review, subscribe. And if you are willing to donate anything towards the podcast, even $1, you can head to Patreon at patreon.com/darkcrossroads. Any money donated goes straight to the podcast and keeps us going and keeps us making new episodes and getting better, improving, and helping with research. But with that said, don't forget to be weird, stay different, and most of all, do not trust anyone. See you next time. Thank you so much.